Okay, our next speaker is José Adrián Barragán-Álvarez, and he is the, Jose, where are you? There you are. He is the curator of Latin Americana at the Bancroft Library, across the bay for those of you. There we go. Prior to the Bancroft, he was the curator at the Texas General Land Office. He received his undergraduate degrees in Spanish and Latin American Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and his doctorate in history from the University of Texas at Austin. His dissertation was titled "The Feat of Commerce, Mule Trains and Transportation in 18th Century New Spain." I tried to get a picture of a mule train there on the upper right. Jose, you can tell me if I got it right or not. Jose will be talking about the recent exhibit at the Bancroft Library, which was titled "Visualizing Place."
Bears. Yeah, it's hard to invite someone to this side of the bay and not wear my colors, right? So I am wearing the gold socks and the blue pants. Can't take me to enemy territory and not have me share my colors. But thank you all for being here. It's really hard to follow up, David, in a presentation like this. So I'll do my best to guide you through a tiny little thing that we did, because now it feels so much smaller when you have all these amazing projects that this center has done. It really has been a sort of, for me, as I'm a historian, but a map sort of adjacent map nerd. Consider myself one very, very deeply. So we mounted a couple of exhibits at the land office when I was there as a translator for one of the oldest positions in the state of Texas. So we did a couple of exhibits at the Whitty Museum, at the Alamo. You might have heard of it. Texans have certainly heard of it. And at different places, they went to the Natural History Museum in Houston. And so when I came to Bancroft, my old home, I felt like I just needed to also highlight the map collection there. And I've been working with Teresa Salazar, the curator of Western Americana, and David Faulds, the curator of her books, to sort of come up with some sort of theme, something that we could do to highlight those maps. Since I got here, then the pandemic happened and we had to kind of wait a little bit longer. So this has been a long time coming for us. We've explored many, many themes, but we kind of had to narrow it down because of our collection. So this was sort of our statement that, maps are really about creating a sense of space for yourself, for where you are. You map your own space wherever you are at the time. So that's what many of these maps do, whether they're printed, whether they're hand-drawn, whether they're modern day things you do on a computer. It's all about what's familiar to you. So with that mentality, we went in and used our gallery. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to come to the Bancroft Gallery. We're open during the week from 10 to 4. So it's a sort of a narrow space. We wish we could open on the weekends, but it's within the locked building, so you can't do that. But yeah, so this was just sort of the space that we were able to put together. Some that might be more easily recognizable. I noticed as I was coming up both on the stairs and then as part of the California Map Society's logo, there's a California as an island. So it's sort of a common trope here. And then what I was asked to come talk to you about was I'm sort of using maps from all over, collections all over, including many from the Rumsey Center. I was able to actually put collections of or recreate the exhibit on an online Spotlight exhibit using Spotlight, a system that I believe was also created on this campus that we can use, or this library that we can then use at Berkeley to put together exhibits. So I'm gonna just pick 3 of the different sections to speak to you about the ones in blue. I'm gonna just talk maybe about 1 or 2 of those maps that were from that, and you can see that link there. And I think it's also linked in the program that was created, so you can see the whole exhibit there. So the first one that I want to talk about is our constructed narratives or handmade maps. These are maps that are all hand-drawn. These are part of the California land grants. These were land grants that were given to the first settlers in the state, the Mexican and Spanish sort of arrivals that came in the 18th and early 19th century. These mostly men, but also women, received land grants from the Mexican government, primarily, a few from the Spanish government, but most of them were from the Mexican government. And then in the 1850s, as California joined the United States, all of these land grants were forced to have to be re-adjudicated, meaning they had to go through a whole legal process in order for their lands to be recognized. Those materials for those lands to be recognized are all housed at the Bancroft Library, both the legal cases and their accompanying maps. Every landowner was asked to create a map of their space. And so you can see that there are different views and different ways of people for putting their space, that conceptualizing the space that they were claiming together, right? So here, and they're not, I should go back a little, some of the earlier ones, some of more of these handmade sort of explorations were done by usually the landowner and working with someone who knew how to sort of draw maps. They're called diseños, who could make these diseños. And others, of course, like the middle one, are done by surveyors. So this was part of the longer process. We have now digitized both all of the maps, but also their accompanying land grant cases. And one of my colleagues who's here, who's worked tirelessly, Adrian Sierra, on working on digitizing this material. So it's now all available on our website to view. So these are different spaces. San Luis Obispo. This is the lands near Mission San Miguel. The next one is the land case for the Peralta brothers in what is now Oakland, from about Lake Merritt north to Richmond. And the last one, of course, is Point Reyes and Bolinas Bay. It's very recognizable sort of space visually from above. But one of my favorites is this one. This is Rancho San Miguelito in present-day Monterey County. And it's just, it harkens back to an old tradition of map making in central Mexico that is very much reflected in these maps. So the relaciones geográficas of the 17th century, of the 16th century, and then later of the 18th century, both of those, there's a lot here that sort of mirrors some of those traditions. And those are now housed at UT Austin has a good selection of relaciones geográficas, and those were indigenous surveys that were done back in the 1580s. And so this, done in the 1850s or around the 1850s, sort of still continues that sort of tradition of capturing the space around it. So you've got the first south is up top, and you've got the Santa Lucia Mountains sort of surrounding the area, rivers, likely the home of the landowner sort of closer to the center. Of course, a bear on it. There's a bear scratching an apple tree or some sort of tree. Then at the end, there's another reason why it's a favorite, but also because these would have been sort of points that they would have given to the surveyors when they were creating the actual survey with the metes and bounds of the land to have it recognized by the U.S. government. So all of those points that you see are reference points that the landowner had. So no, there wasn't a bear when the surveyors went, but they would have said, it's a tree that's been marked by, continuing group of bears that comes by, or a family, or one bear that kind of likes to scratch itself on those, and they leave very permanent markings on those trees. The other thing, of course, that you can't, not like a compass rose that's just very clear. And then these documents, to make it official, Mexican documents had to have a seal of the state. These men didn't have access to the seal. They were far from the centers of power in Mexico City, or even a notario, a notary, who would have been able to come and actually notarize this document and make it official. So they actually drew the seal, which sort of negates the whole seal process, but I still love it anyway. It's just a beautiful sort of time and space, and also shows, you know, the lack of government officials at this time up here, official government. The next sort of section that I wanted to talk about is, as a curator of Latin America, I had to do something about Mexico City. It's a mega city that is complex, and for those of us who've been there and lived there, it's monstrous and has too many barrios and too many places to know. But it's still a dear place in my life, and having done research there during my dissertation and lived there for many years, it's still very much a, you know, I have my spaces that I love, that I love to go back to. And then in searching for maps about the city, though, you don't find early maps from the colonial period. You might find the map from the second letter of Cortés. That's sort of the first map of Mexico City that's published. That's, you know, very problematic because it's published in Europe with European eyes. So to have indigenous maps of the city are very hard, because the concept of mapping their city wasn't necessarily how we understand it today. They would have had maps, they likely had maps, but not how we might see them or think of them today. So in the after the arrival of the Spaniards, every viceroy had to have an audit after they left office. Wouldn't that be nice to have all of our officers have an audit after they leave office? So during the Viceroy's Velasco audit in 1565, the indigenous community of Mexico City came forward and said, you know, we've been overtaxed. And in that process of proving to the colonial authorities that they had been overtaxed, they produced the Códice Osuna. They produced many books that we now call, or many visual materials that we now call codices, which doesn't really apply, but they produced, one of the many ones that they produced was the Códice Osuna, which was taken to Madrid, and it lives in Madrid. And it was part of a much larger 500-page document that documented their complaint to the authorities about the abuses by the Spaniards. And so in one of the pages, I found this, which is a map of Mexico City, an early map done by indigenous members of the community of Mexico City. No, it doesn't look like a map to us, but when you start to look at what they've noted, it really shows a grid, sort of the four neighborhoods. It's titled The Four Neighborhoods of Mexico City at the very top, by a Spaniard who then went in and sort of translated this to the authorities. And you have the barrio of San Sebastián at that moment, which had been known as Atzcualco in Nahuatl. Down here in the northwest would be Santa Maria Huepopan. So it's using the Spanish names with the church now to represent the Altememes, the not quite the Altepetl, not quite the ruling the land and mountain space that they understood as a community, but the subdivisions, the Altememes. And so these are the four, but now using the names that the Spaniards had given them, and sort of separated in these two. What they've also done is move the ceremonial center from what we call the Zócalo now, the indigenous sort of center, ceremonial center of the Mexico Tenochtitlan, to the new church of San José de los Naturales. This was the church founded by Franciscans for the instruction of indigenous communities. It's not quite in the center, or not quite where we are at the Zócalo, but a few blocks away in a much larger Franciscan complex that was there. So the center moved, but in the new vision of the city has moved, but it's still very much in this sort of totem pole. You've got the symbol of Mexico City under Fray Pedro de Gante, who leads his church, San José de los Naturales, sort of situating itself right in the middle of Mexico City. Another map that we also showcased in the physical exhibit, because it's very large, is the Plano General de la Ciudad de Mexico, printed in 1807. It's a survey done in 1793. And if you have access to either I can make this accessible, but it's also on Calisphere. It's a high resolution map that you can really get into and see all the different neighborhoods and how they've been further subdivided using the same indigenous quadrant. They continue to subdivide the city in order to create official spaces to oversee the city and see its cleanliness and see all the sort of the bourbon reform-minded things that were happening in the 18th century. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the maps of California as an island, because we sometimes think of ourselves as an island, right? Certainly politically, we're slightly out. But I wanted to talk more about these two maps that we featured in the exhibit. The first is the California that has the 5 different states of California, including the parts where it's still attached to the mainland. And then it becomes this wonderful island with the second state that Sanson does with these large bays on the north, right? The first state is this sort of flat California that has a sort of a flat top right at the top here. And then he gets creative a couple of years later, adds some bays just to make sure that, it looked like an island. And then what was really important is how contemporary artist, Sandy Rodriguez, who has done an incredible amount of research into sort of immigration and the movement and the people who are here, our people, the Latinos in the US, and how they're treated, how we're looked at, has come into Bancroft and done a lot of research using both the land grants that I spoke about earlier to draw some of her maps, some of her contemporary works that she's looking at. She's done a lot with the retention and incarceration of children at the border. And so you can see some of those along the border there. But in this one, she featured Calafia, Queen Calafia, who ruled this mythical island, and the Spaniards in the Sergas de Esplandian gave California the name Calafia, or named California after the space where Queen Calafia sort of ruled. So she looks at sort of gold sickness, the movement west, the exploitation of the land, and also of its people. And it's a really fascinating look at Sanson's map sort of being used in the 21st century by a contemporary artist. And so I just wanted to highlight her work and the collections that we're still doing at Bancroft. Not sure where I am on time. Yep. Okay. So I just wanted to show back to the exhibit. You're welcome to see it. It's up online. There are still some that I need to scan now that we've completed, now that the exhibit is down. For example, on the section from Mexico from colony to nation, I had a section in there of maps from the Bancroft that look at the Mexican-American War, not what we call it. Mexicans call it the War of Northern Aggression, or the North American Invasion. We have various names for it. We didn't see it as a war. But in there, we have maps that were done on the field during the war by both Mexican map makers, cartographers, and also American cartographers who were in Mexico making some of these maps of places where the main battles were happening, like Veracruz, Cerro Gordo, and Mexico City, Chapultepec, which was, of course, taken over by the US troops. So those maps are still needed. I still need to just get the files and upload them, but I'm still sort of a work in progress. I think, that's it. If you have any questions, yes, please. Yes.
What was to have the southern direction pointed at the top?
Yeah, north, from what I understand, north at the top doesn't really become a thing until the late 19th century. It's not, and that's for a lot of maps, not just these maps in Mexico, but sort of everywhere. And many indigenous maps had east at the top, so sort of you orient yourself to the sun, the sunrise, and then you draw the rest of your space to that.
When you showed the map of San Miguelito, the first thing that came to mind was the work of a printmaker named Carol Summers, who worked in the Santa Cruz area about 100 years later.
Okay.
Just specifically the landscapes in the back, and I'm wondering if there's any documented discussion about, like, whether he knew about those maps or those work.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I don't know, but maybe we could follow up later and look at some of his work and see if there was access to the maps. I mean, the Bancroft Library has had these since 1906. So if there was some access to those, then there might have been some correlation, just like Sandy's work now. Yeah. Thank you for that. Great. Thank you so much.